Oh God, this movie's so woke. So freaking woke. Get it? Let's review The Red Mask. The Red Mask stars Helena Howard, Ayana Sarkis, and is directed by Ritesh Gupta.
So what now? We gotta end with a...
What's up, guys? Welcome to a brand new 2025 review. Did that intro piss half of you off, or 40% or 60%? I don't know. I didn't mean to, okay? It was just a joke. Everybody calm down, all right? That's kind of the point of this movie. To sort of poke fun at the current day and age in a slasher movie. We'll get there. I got to give a huge shout out to a good friend of mine, Megan Fields-Johnson. She had a part in making this movie, and she reached out to me and asked me if I'd like to review it. I checked out the trailer and I thought, oh hell yeah, it's a meta slasher. And movies like Scream kind of started this whole meta slasher thing. Scream is actually mentioned in this movie, I think a couple times. But yeah, I jumped all over the chance at doing this. Megan Fields-Johnson actually directed a movie I reviewed quite a few years ago called The Ice Cream Truck, which I quite enjoyed. Another slasher movie. So yeah, check that one out if you haven't seen it. But anyway, diving into the review, let's give you a quick plot synopsis. The Red Mask literally is about a writer who is writing a script that happens to be a remake of a very beloved early 80s slasher called The Red Mask. Obviously, there is no slasher called The Red Mask in the early 80s. This is fiction. But in this fictional world, The Red Mask is like the equivalent of, say, Friday the 13th, right? Where there were tons of sequels spawned off of it, and it followed a certain formula. So the pressure is on for this current day writer who is quite progressive, and she, her issue here is that the fans want the movie to be a certain way. They don't want anything messed with. They don't want anything changed. They don't want heavy messaging pushed in the movie. And I think we can all relate to that in this day and age. And anytime the word woke is mentioned these days, it sets off a fire alarm. It just really, really does. So much so, I think, in this current day and age that people can't look past the word at the actual movie behind it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of movies that push messaging so hard that it actually gets in the way of what the movie is supposed to do, and they do kind of cover that in here. A perfect example, and I'll give you one, is the 2019 Black Christmas. I don't know if the filmmakers that made this movie liked the new Black Christmas, but I can tell you right now, I hated it because of how it pushed the original idea of Black Christmas to the side in order to lean too heavily on, feminism. In the wrong way. This movie, funny enough, mentions the original Black Christmas 1974 as being woke. And you know what? The word woke didn't exist back then, but I guarantee you, if that movie came out today, it might be considered woke. I don't know. There is an argument to be made. Also, horror in general, and they do mention that in this as well, has always been kind of progressive in terms of not discriminating, in terms of the cast, and even issues that are pushed. I think horror is kind of at the forefront of everything, but horror does it right, I think, for the most part. There's been a couple of instances, which I mentioned, Black Christmas 2019, but I think for the most part, horror does it right, and that's why horror is still so freaking strong today, thanks to great companies like Neon and A24. Horror is still very progressive, but these filmmakers, they know how to make a great, creepy, scary movie without pushing an agenda. So I've talked too long about that. Now let's get into the actual story here. Our main character, Alina, who happens to be the writer, she has this girlfriend by the name of Dietz, and that's part of the frustration from her point of view because she is gay. She has a very serious relationship with her girlfriend Dietz, and I think she just wants to try something a little different than the tried and true formula of the 80s and 90s in slasher movies. So where the plot really starts thickening is you have these two other characters. Ryan and Claire, they come into the picture. They happen to have a reservation for this particular cabin, which is an Airbnb. Backing up a little bit, Dietz's brother, I believe, that owns it. And I guess there was a reservation already made through her brother for that Airbnb. So I just talked about another Airbnb movie, I think last week or a couple of weeks ago, but we've been having a lot of Airbnb horror movies. And this particular plot point, which is a little tired, is a couple coming in and another couple already being there. You know, they've done that a couple of times now. They do it in this movie. And I think it's just a plot device to move the plot forward, to put complete strangers in the same location together, which is an irresistible idea for a horror movie, if I'm being honest. And now we finally have an excuse to do it, I guess. And the game here is Elena. She's been working on this script, racking her brain, trying to come up with the best idea. She even has all these like rules written down. And these two new people that come in, they happen to be massive horror fans. And it's sort of like, hey, let's try this script out on you and we'll do a little role playing, I guess. And that's what they do. And so the rest of the movie is, you guessed it, somebody is not playing by the rules and actually killing people. Now, ripping the Band-Aid off, I really, really enjoyed this movie. It was quite surprising. I'm going to start off by giving you one little con, and then that way I can go right into my pros, because I think it's worthy to mention this first. Because a lot of you guys, you're going to watch this movie, and I think it does take a minute to get to, I guess, the action. Like, there's a good, I'd say, 30 minutes-ish of exposition. And once the couple gets in there, and you might say to yourself when you're in this first 30-minute portion that you might give up on the movie a little bit. But let me just stress to you right now, it's necessary. The dialogue that's going on is necessary because they're talking about the modern movie landscape, not just horror in general, but comparing it to the horror from the past and what you can get away with as far as progressing and trying new things. And I think this movie does it very intelligently. You know, it's definitely an us versus them type of movie. You do have a couple that do not want change whatsoever. And then you have this other young couple that they want change. They want to try new things. They're kind of tired of the same old formula. And I do think those people exist. Not even like left and right. I'm talking about just some horror fans. They don't really like the older stuff, right? And maybe that's the younger viewers. But I like that this movie, it draws lines. It says, hey, these characters are this way, these characters are this way. And all that's there for is to really just set the table for a fun little ride of a movie, to be honest. Because they just have a really interesting discussion. And I think you can agree on both sides of the argument. And I think that's the whole point of Elena in this movie, is trying to find that balance. She's so afraid of pissing off her audience and pissing off the studio and all that. And she's aware of woke culture and messaging, and you know, how far can she push it. So once the tracks are all laid on that front, then this movie really gets going. And let me just say, it takes some chances. It really offers up some nice surprises along the way, and it keeps you guessing. It definitely keeps you guessing. And I just thought this movie was really, really refreshing for a slasher movie. It reminded me of Sick. Remember that movie from a couple of years ago? I think Kevin Williamson wrote that movie, actually. And that one dealt with a current issue at the time, which was the COVID virus. And this one is also dealing with, you know, the debate over woke culture. And they even talk about online communities and talking about, you know, woke versus non-woke in terms of movies. And I think for horror, this subject is perfect. I think it's much more cut and dry when you're talking about, you know, like Marvel and DC type stuff, right? I think they really push things way too far over in that avenue. But in horror, I think things are a lot more delicate, right? Like when we start talking about horror movies that are just way too woke, it's hard to name like 5 movies, or at least for me it is, all right? And I do think, and I've talked about this in the past, I don't mind using modern characters in horror movies. I don't mind having characters of different races, characters of different lifestyles. I've never had a problem with any of that. As a matter of fact, I think it actually adds to the recipe. The more, the merrier in terms of stories, you know? And I think this movie handles it quite well. Now, talking about the violence and the blood, I don't think there's an overabundance of it, but there are some really cool kill scenes in this movie. I can definitely think of 1 or 2 that really stick out and had me kind of jumping in my seat. And I gotta say, the characters are quite surprising. Like, all 4 main characters, I think, are equally important. Yeah, there is a main character here, the writer, but everyone else plays a really meaty part. And you'll find yourself rooting for characters that you might not expect to be rooting for as hard as you're rooting for them. Does that make sense? Obviously, the reason I'm saying this is because there are some spoilers in this movie which I do not want to give away. I'll just say this, there's a character in this movie that surprised the hell out of me, and I loved this character to death by the end of the movie. That's all I'm going to say, okay? You'll know what I'm talking about once you get there, I promise. There's plenty of blood at the beginning and the end of the movie, and I think it's just a very unique and fresh plot, okay? Now, I already covered cons as far as like it taking a bit to get to the action. Just give it like 30 minutes. I'd say there's probably some moments here where you're going to want to kind of pick at character decisions, but they actually address that in the movie because the main character, she happens to be a writer, and she talks about horror tropes in the movie abundantly, and it plays into the overall plot of the movie, especially in the last act, and boy is it fun. So guys, I'm going to give this a purchase worthy for sure. The Red Mask, I just heard about this movie a couple weeks ago. I know it just premiered at Screamfest actually yesterday. So as far as where you can get it on VOD, I didn't see a date, but I'm sure that we should see a date pretty soon to get it on VOD, if it's not there already. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day on Fridays. Do FIFA on Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums and on my social, support me on Patreon, become a channel member, buy me coffee. You know, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day, and Drumdum out.